All right, so we're talking about the dry sump as opposed to the wet sump. Let's see here. Always pick the wrong damn button. There we go. All right. I think we're good with this one for now. Yep. All right, so dry sump. This is out of the Bonanza and a drawing that I did here, which I like it, but I don't because it leads you to think that the oil cooler is below the engine when the oil cooler is above the engine. So if you go out and look at the Bonanza that we have out there, which sadly got damaged in the wind, it does have a dry sump engine. And the reason why it has a dry sump is simply because when the wheel comes up, there's not enough room for it to have a wet sump. So they had to put a very small pan on it and then put an oil tank up high to get clearance for the nose wheel. So that's why you'll get a dry sump in a nose retractable gear aircraft, because sometimes there's just not a lot of room. So anyway, this particular engine, if you look at, and this would be similar to all dry sump engines, similar. Okay, so we dissect a little bit. Oil tank goes up higher, and we have oil comes out of the oil tank this way, and it flows downhill into, this shows a screen and an oil temperature bulb. So takeaway number one, oil temp is taken before the engine. So we can write that, oil temp is taken as oil goes into the engine. And that's going to be true of all aircraft oil systems that I'm aware of.
Is it right after it passes through the oil cooler?
It's going to depend.
Because that's what the FAA says, according to your Q&As.
No, I don't think so. So they said what now?
It says that the oil tank is taken immediately after it passes through the oil cooler.
I don't think so.
Which I thought was off. But
Yeah, it's taken. Well, it's going to depend on where the oil cooler is in the system. So let's take a look at something. Let's go back just a few slides. And let's look at this one. So if this is out of your textbook, and this would be a Continental as far as I can tell, oil is drawn up. Yeesh. This doesn't show going out. Oil pressure relief bypass. I believe that's going to show going out through the oil cooler. So you have an oil temperature control valve would be the very next thing. So oil pump. Then it's going to go through a temperature control valve, which could send it through the oil cooler or it could not. So if you have two paths, then you can't necessarily have it going past the oil cooler. It's got to be before it goes in the engine.
I mean, that doesn't show us anything.
No, it didn't show us anything.
That just shows it on one valve.
Let's go here. This is your Lycoming.
That's the one out of the manual.
Yeah. So we've got suction screen to oil pump, oil cooler bypass, or oil cooler. That's your Vernotherm, right? So give you two options. If this shuts down, it closes off that passage. Oil has to go through the oil cooler, then back up here, then through the screen, then to your accessories, oil pressure relief, back to sump. That's the ball. Pressure is going to go up. I haven't seen an oil temperature anywhere on here.
Wouldn't it be more efficient to filter the oil before it's cooled?
Well, the oil cooler acts as a nice filter on its own too. Where's the oil temp taken? Oil temp is taken right here. Can't draw this one. Oil temp is right here. At the pressure screen. You literally have your pressure screen housing with the screen in it.
Yeah.
That hole in the back goes right in that hole. So it goes right there. So we're going to check it immediately after the oil cooler.
Right.
Yeah, so that'd be true on Lycoming, for sure. This doesn't work for me. My oil cooler's up here, and the oil temp is taken, I think, right after it. So
That is correct.
So what's definitely correct with Lycoming, and I know that, where was I before? There, I was there. I know oil temp is taken as it goes into the engine, so that would be oil cooler, then engine. Except my oil cooler is mounted to the crank, to the case, which is a lot of Continentals are, and the oil pump's in the back, and the oil cooler's up front. So it goes through the gallery. Oil cooler. I'll have to think about that one. But don't argue with the FAA questions. But, okay.
Listen, I'm just,
This is a fact. We'll take that one as a fact, certainly for Lycoming. Fact number 2, oil temp is taken as it goes into the engine, meaning that still holds true, because oil cooler, then engine.
right, so that's still.
Yes. And so my point here is the oil temp is going to get higher as it gets into the engine. Always. And I guess the reason why they did that is because they didn't want pilots to freak out and poop their pants and smell like poop. So they're always going to give us best case scenario. Now, a little interesting tidbit. Speaking of this is the back of well, it's IO 360, but interestingly enough, it's Continental. This looks exactly like the accessory case for a Continental 0200 as well. Same design. And the oil temp, you have a screen right here, and the oil temp is right here, and they take a tube called a blast tube out of the baffling, and they aim a jet of cooling air right on that fitting right there with the screen and oil temperature ball bar. And without that, your oil temp's going to look a lot higher. So I'm just saying, that's what they do. They didn't ask me. All right, so back to this.
JPI sensor can be in a different location than.
Same.
Is it?
Well, it depends. Sorry, so if you have an engine monitor that is not a primary, so some engine monitors, like the electronic engine monitors, you can buy as a primary or not primary. If it's not primary, then you have to leave your other instruments installed and intact. And then the engine analyzer becomes secondary information. And so you have to find a different spot to put the sensors. Like, for example, my aircraft came with number 3 cylinder has a CHT in the hole in the cylinder. And so if I bought an analyzer, engine monitor, if you will, that was secondary, I would have to do cylinders. 5 cylinders would have probes that went up, but that one cylinder, number 3, would have to have a spark plug washer cylinder head temp. So you follow? Because I can't take out the primary that Cessna put there. Unless I pay a lot more money and buy a primary system analyzer, which comes with the STC to allow you to remove all of the old stuff, then you mount all new stuff.
On my 0320, I can't remember if it's a pressure or temperature, there's a sensor that's all the way at the front, up by the top.
Uh-huh. That's that. Okay, so those 3 plugs that I had you put in, those pipe plugs.
Yeah.
Okay, so you take out that pipe plug up front, that's the pressure gallery, and you put a sensor up there. It's probably your pressure sensor.
Yeah, that's offhand, I was thinking that maybe it was a temp sensor.
Could be.
It's quite away from
It
the
is.
opposite corner of the.
I think it might be a press,
It
but
may be pressure.
so anyway, all right, so oil goes downhill, if you ask me, into the pressure pump, and it goes around the outside of the gears, not through the middle. And then it's going to go up into the oil gallery. We're going to take our pressure right here, and it's going to do pressure fed everything, splash, right? It's going to feed all of the engine, and then it drips back down into the crankcase, engine case, sorry, the dry sump. And then we have a scavenger pump that will suck it up and push it back uphill into the oil tank. Scavenger pump is the larger pump. Larger pump. Scavenge pumps are always bigger than primary pumps. The reason why is because a primary pump is pumping oil and oil alone. The scavenge pump has to pump oil and air. So the oil's been aerated, it's foamy, and so you have to pump a little bit more than what you pumped in. So they make those pumps larger. And in this particular case, they're showing you that then the cooler is integrated into the tank. I don't know about that. I copied this. Let me see what it's saying. Oil system of the Nanza oil system. Oil is fed to the engine pump from a supply tank mounted just above and behind the engine. Told you it was above. The return oil is picked up by a scavenging pump and returned to the supply tank, passing through a cooler, which is an integral part of the tank. The oil tank capacity is I don't know what that is. 2 to 1? 2-1 semicolon 2 gallons. 2 to 1.2 gallons? I don't know. Filler neck is acceptable, raising enough engine calories, excess door. That's not important. Checked after each flight. Not important. The population be maintained in accords. Both oil screen check out from the oil draining. Oh, both oil pumps, the oil screen and a check valve. It's got to be a check valve. Okay, this is up here.
It says it right there,
Relief valve.
right before the pressure pump.
Screen. Oh, check valve right here. Check valve. Let me think. Yes, because the oil tank is up here. Oil tank is up here.
It's supposed to be 2.5.
That's it. 2.5. Thank you. 2.5 gallons. Thank you. Because the oil tank is here, I believe we have a check valve, and I think if I were going to design this, I would put a little spring so it's not really acting as a check valve to keep oil from flowing backwards. I'm just making up stuff as I go here. But the oil tank is higher, and we need a check valve to keep the oil from just draining out of the engine and down into it, which is a fact. So I do know there are some check valves where they put a little spring on it so that you have to have the oil pump operating and it'll suck the door open. Okay, again, I'm kind of making this up as I go on this one because I just am thinking about how it has to work, given the location of the oil tank being higher and a check valve. And what the check valve is there to do is to keep the oil from the tank that's higher than the engine from just going down and filling up the crankcase when you're not using it so that it all fill up right there. Well, we don't want that, right? So I gotta erase that. Follow me?
Follow.
Okay, oil tank is high. If I fill up the oil tank, it's just gonna run slowly through these gears and start filling up the crankcase. So then when I go out there and this oil tank, which is up higher, has a dipstick in it, which we don't call a dipstick in aviation because we don't have cigarette lighters either. We have cigar lighters, so we're very sophisticated people. So we don't have dipsticks. We have
Oil gauge.
oil level gauges
Oil level gauge.
on a stick. That is a fact. Okay, so you pull out the oil level gauge and you look at it and it's completely bone dry. I don't know where all of my oil went, but I know that it takes 1:2 gallons, 2.5 gallons. Therefore, somebody must have stole all of my oil. So what do?
Check your check valve.
Get your cigar out, light it, go down the store. You got to order some oil. You got a case with you. Pour a whole case of oil in there. Pull out your oil level dipstick, and you're thinking, all right. What is it? Oil level dipstick?
Oil gauge.
Oil gauge. I covered it all. And you follow me so far?
Yeah.
You check it, and you're like, good. I got a good 10 quarts in there. You put it in there. You get up. You start the engine. And there's a fountain of oil shooting out of the cowling. Why is there a fountain of oil shooting out of the cowling? Because you had 10 quarts in here, then you put 10 quarts in there, and this is not a 20-quart system. Now, how do I know this? Because we did it. Our Bonanza only gets run once a year, and it's usually at the end of this next semester. I'll run it with you guys. And I sent somebody out there to check it, and they came back, and of course, I'm busy doing something, and they're like, yeah, it's only got like 5 quarts. We're going to put some oil in there. Okay, you put some oil in there. And then we started it up, and it was a whole lot of extra oil. So we have a problem. What's the problem?
Check valve.
Leaky check valve. It's draining from the tank slowly into
The rest.
there. And then it starts leaking on the floor. So if you remember the last day of our electricity class, went out there and ran it for a few minutes. I was just running it to get the oil out of the dry sump into the tank so it wouldn't leak all over the floor. But then we left it outside and it got damaged. So, all right, takeaways. 1, it's got a check valve. 2, oil temp is taken as it goes into the engine, and then the temp goes up, gets hotter. Yeah. You're going to make trouble.
Is that a mechanical pump on the engine, attached to the engine, or is it?
It is a mechanical pump. Oil pumps are always driven off the engine.
No, so
Always.
Is that like off the gear case or something?
Yep. Continental, been a long time. They'll actually run 1 shaft and 2 pumps. So 2. It's been a long time since I built one. One is about yay wide, and one's about yay wide. And so it's all held within a duplex pump system. After the engine, now low. And oil pumps do not have shear shafts. They're not worried about you breaking an oil pump. It just needs to keep running, because if oil pump quits, everything quits. So you just keep on and going. So no shear shafts. They want them to run. So, all right. So our oil is cooled after it comes out of the engine. Temperature is going in. Oil is going to get hotter in the engine, about 40 degrees hotter. So, all right, firewall, second outlet. Okay. Let's see. So, oil tank is mounted on the firewall. This is true of all dry sump engines. Proposed engines. Let me see. Oops, got to erase this. Talk about dry sumps. So what else has a dry sump besides the Bonanza? Radial engines. Okay, so oil tank is mounted to firewall. Let me see. Oil tank is mounted. It could be mounted on to the engine motor mount too. But that's typical. Outlet is near the lowest point. A second outlet is provided. So a second outlet is provided below primary outlet for prop feathering. So in other words, we have a tank, and they'll put a little standpipe like that. So this will be 2 engine. And then we'll put another one right here, which goes to prop feather on some engines. And then the oil, which shall be blue, under normal circumstances, it doesn't matter. But if we have a catastrophic engine failure and it blows all the oil out, it's only going to blow it out to this point right here. And so now this runs dry, but we still have plenty of oil here. And so what propeller feathering is normally propeller is such so that, it's moving air, it's pulling you through. But should you have to shut the engine down and put it away on a multi-engine aircraft, you take the blades and you twist them so that they're going into the air so it won't try and feather the propeller. as we talked about before, because if we had a catastrophic engine failure and having that propeller windmill is just causing the engine to vibrate horribly bad, come apart, it causes drag, all kinds of stuff. We just want to put it away. Otherwise, it's just sitting there running. And in this case, if we ran out of oil, it would just sit there running with no oil in it, which is not good. And then until it stopped. So our propellers do run off of oil pressure off the engine. Some propellers are, oil to keep them out of feather. And some propellers, most of our modern twins, if they lose oil pressure, they're automatically going to feather. So you don't really need this, right? You lose oil pressure, boom, prop just goes to feather. It takes oil pressure to keep it out of feather. And that's why they designed it that way. So you don't have to have this tank and this extra stuff. Because if we had a wet sump engine, well, now we got this big problem and it's not going to work. So we have a dry sump engine. So we're talking about like the hydromatic propellers, which use oil. They have a feathering pump on them. It's actually we'll talk about next class. It's a whole nother pump system where there's a big old button in the cockpit and they push that and this electric motor starts running with pumps that runs through a transfer gear, puts like 700 PSI and it starts to feather the propeller. So that's a whole nother system you'd find on radial engines. So you'd have to have a tank like this with a little sump. Yeah.
So feathering is the tilting of the blade?
Well, that's when they go this way,
Full flat.
full flat,
Full flat.
because they don't operate this way. But normally they're like this to work, but when they go all the way like that, that's feathered. Then they'll stop rotating. If you ever watch like a King Air or turboprop shutdown, they're really like, it's like, what did you just do? And
Loud as hell.
yeah, whoa, what they do is they're actually running the blades completely flat. They're at idle, and then they twist them. Well, they twist different. They go completely flat, and it just stops the engine in the turboprops. So, all right. So that's our second outlet we use to feather the propeller. Again, that's more of the hydromatic, which we'll talk about. Big old-timey radial engines have to have oil to feather the prop. Modern twins, if you lose oil, they're automatic in a feather. That's just the way they default to. It takes oil to keep them out of feather. All right, so aircraft with really large tanks. I mean, we're talking, just the little Continental W670. So that's 670 cubic inches, which is a rather small radial, only 7 cylinders. That uses, when I wrote it down, 6 gallons of oil. That's a small radial, right? So we get into bigger radials, more oil. So it takes a very long time to heat up 6 gallons of oil. So what they will do is use something called an accelerating well. So imagine it like this. I'm making it red. So we have this supply going to the engine. Well, if you put like this inside of another can, a small can, and just drilled some holes in it, and then you deliver the oil back in this way. So this is like from engine. So the oil then comes back from the engine. Just came from the engine, and it's kind of warm, a little bit warm, and it goes into this little can. And so where does it suck out of? Right here from this can. Well, it's got some holes in it, right? And so this oil right here is really going to warm up a lot faster. And as this oil warms up, and it will get warm faster, but it's got holes in it, which will also draw in some oil from around it. But you can see how it would accelerate the whole idea of getting some oil warm. So that's an accelerating well, or a hopper, or temperature accelerating well. So that is hopefully I explained that well to you. A hopper, or temperature accelerating well. And we'd use that with what?
Radials.
Yeah, something with a very large oil supply. All right, I had some stuff I was going to talk about, required items under FAR 231013, but they've changed it. And this stuff really isn't there anymore. But I think, unfortunately, now that I remember, they haven't removed it from the FAA test questions. And I believe this is on the FAA test question. So we'll go back to this now that I think about it. Tell me if this is on your Q&As, since I don't think the Q&As. Required items, and that is FAR 231013. We have expansion space. Does that sound familiar? So tank must have expansion space. Tank must have expansion. I don't like it that they ask stuff like this on the FAA questions. You're not designing an airplane, you're trying to fix it. You don't get to choose which tank, you put the one you're supposed to have. So tank must have expansion space of 10% or 1/2 gallon, whichever is more. Whichever is more. To account for expansion of the oil. And it gets aerated, expands out, heat. Let's see. So it's got to have expansion. It's got to have some sort of vent. Let's see. Well, there's half a page of notes. Each tank must be vented to the engine from the top part of the expansion space so that the vent connection is not covered by oil in any normal flight conditions. Oil tank vents must be arranged so that condensed water vapor that might freezing obstruct the line cannot accumulate at any point. For aerobatic category airplanes, there must be means to prevent hazardous loss of oil during aerobatic flight maneuvers, including short periods of inverted flight. The cap should have a cap with the words oil. And if you're looking at it upside down, that would be 710. So that is oil upside down. So if it says that, you're like, what? Words oil and reference to grade. In reference to grade. Capacity is nice, but not required. No idea where I'm at here. It's not a timeline, so we'll just do this. Dot. Oil temp gauge. All right, oil temp is taken where? Is taken as oil enters the engine. Well, obviously your engine that you're working on, it's already in the engine. So what do you mean as it enters the engine? It's already in the engine, which is to say it enters it, it's taken like after the pump, right after the pump. And it's headed off to do its job. Oil temp should be should be 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I can put this after oil pump. After oil pump. Max temp 240. Let's see, the engine max temp 240, that's indicated. Engine will add 40 to 50 degrees F as it goes through. All right, so why 180 to 200? Well, you would think cooler's better. So why do I want 180 to 200?
For the water vapor to boil.
Water vapor to boil. So if we get it to 180, we add 40, we're at 220. Water boils at 212 at sea level. As you go up in sea level, let me see, it boils faster at lower temp. Okay. Oh, that's right. Remember, do you ever have somebody show you water boil at room temperature? It's really cool. When I for a while I taught second year classes, and I had AC systems, air conditioning systems, and I had so I brought in a jar of water and we hooked a vacuum pump up to it and screwed the lid on, hooked a vacuum to it, and the water starts boiling when you have a vacuum. So higher up in altitude you go, the quicker water will boil. So sea level anyway. So we want to get that oil up to temperature that blows off the water and clears the water out of our oil. So that's why 180 is good, up to 200. 240, the indicated, that's what it shows on the gauge. Then the engine will add about that much. I know I told you this already, that about a customer who came in and complained about the oil temp being too high and on and on and on. We checked all that, blah, blah, blah. I told you that story. But the huge takeaway from that is you just can't trust these gauges. And a lot of times what you see on a gauge is just simply a square gauge. It says OILTEMP, and then, yep, you got green, and then red, and 240. You're like, all right, thank you. What does that mean? You know, and then the guy's, you know, well, I'm running right here all the time. I don't like that. So what I did is we took a calibrated thermometer, my friend's wife's candy thermometer. It worked great, right? We got oil boiling, like we just take some fire bricks or something in a acetylene torch or propane torch. You just get it hot, keep stirring it, you know, and stirring it and watch it, and we'll get it all the way up to 240, 250 degrees. And then we'll take it over the engine and we put the temperature bulb of the engine in and the calibrated thermometer and just keep stirring it. And one guy stirs it, and another guy will sit in the cockpit and watch it come out. So, you know, we'll say the red line, and he'll call it out. Okay, it's at the red, and, you know, it's 240. Okay, and then PMET, that's temp going backwards. When it gets to the P, he'll call it out. Okay, that's 220. The M is, you know, 210. And so we'll call it out, and I'll make a card and give it to the owner and say, okay, here's
What's really going on?
here's what it says. So, but I read it forward. So always one temp. So each letter has an assigned value. So you can say, well, I'm flying along at M. That's 210. Which is something I was about to do to my airplane, but I just changed it to a digital. So I don't do that. All right.
Is that your primary now?
I did get a primary. Took out the old system.
Do you still need to keep a backup for oil temp or no?
No, not at all. Not at all. All right. Okay, so we're good with oil temps. Let's just touch on the pressure pump aspect of what we got. What kind of oil pump do we have?
Constant displacement.
Gear driven. Well, this is positive. I like constant displacement better, but I think the wording from your textbook was positive. Positive. We'll put this constant. Constant. I like that better. Displacement. Pump. All right. If I say it's a positive displacement, what does that mean? Well, it's positively displaced. It is going to take a given amount. Let me see.
They've always put it on.
There we go. It is going to take a whatever this volume is right here and be in between these two teeth. It is going to push that amount every time those two teeth come around. It doesn't matter. And so we've got to add 2. So it doesn't matter if there's room or not. It's pushing it out. It's got nowhere to go. It can't slip. It can't find another route. It's got to go that way. If you hook a rubber hose up to this thing and turn this pump on, it will blow the hose. If you put a metal something here, it will go until it blows the metal. It has to pump. right? That's positive displacement. When I say constant displacement, it means it will put out an exact amount per revolution of these gears. So every time those gears around, it's going to put out 4 ounces or whatever it is. It just is. And the faster it spins, the quicker you're going to get those 4 ounces. So that's constant displacement or positive displacement. It's very important that you understand that going into our next class, because we're going to talk so much about positive displacement, constant displacement pumps and how they work and how we're going to make them work, and depend upon the fact that it puts out an exact amount per revolution. So this is very representative of how most engines work. So we have oil comes in, it must go around the pump. It's got nowhere else to go, and the pump's moving, and there's no shear shaft. And so now we maybe have way more pressure than we want. Too much pressure is not a good thing. We start blowing out seals and stuff. We can also blow apart our filters, all kinds of stuff. So ideally, it's just going to come through and it's going to go into our filter. Well, we have a bypass valve. You have a little ball, like Continental uses something that looks a little more like that, that's got a spring on it. And so when you exceed the pressure will push up on that spring, the oil will come around here and go back to the inlet side of the pump. What the hell's that about? Relief valve, bypass valve. Ah, okay. Just a little different. So I take that back. Bypass valve. Bypass valve is in case the oil filter clogs up. Got it?
Space in between there?
Sometimes this bypass valve is built into this right here, actually built into the oil filter. Sometimes they're separate.
Dirty.
So
Yeah,
I
dirty.
made a mistake there. So oil's pumping out. It should go into the oil filter. Goes to the oil filter. If the oil filter should get clogged by metal contaminants, you still want oil, even if it's contaminated. So this will pop open because this is blocked. Or if this starts to get partially blocked, you're going to get unfiltered oil. We'll go through the bypass valve.
Where does it travel, or is it that? I'm not understanding the diagram.
I know, it's a little,
It's a shift.
because it goes this way.
All right, fair enough.
I don't know why
If
they,
that presses up,
They should take out that relief valve.
yes, because you have, that's what they're trying to show here.
Weird direction.
Yeah, it is. So we'll just make it work, okay? So oil, this is closed,
and it will open. Got it.
and it will open if this
And there's-
has a problem. Normally, well, not normally, a lot of times that bypass valve is in here and it provides a way to bypass the filter media. But, all right, so we go off to the engine. So oil pump, oil filter, off to the engine. Well, this going off to the engine is all part of this right here. So it's the same tube, if you will. So whatever pressure is right here is also the same pressure here, 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 and here. Got it? So if the pressure right here, or right here, which is the same as 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 there. Got it? Okay, so if all of that pressure exceeds what you wanted, let's say we don't want anything more than 80 psi, and this tries to get to 90, well, this would know it won't get to 90, so anything over 80 will start pushing this thing open. And as it pushes that open, because it's trying to exceed 80, oil will come back here and go back to the inlet side of the pump. In your Lycoming, it just goes from here back to the sump and then gets sucked back up. As let's just say you were at idle and you hit that 80, right? And now you accelerate and the engine starts moving faster. We're going to pump more oil. What's the pressure want to do?
Right.
Go way up. This just opens more and more and more. Now, because it's on a spring, and the more you press the spring, the harder the spring gets. You'll see 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, but you're not going to see a runaway. Now, once this is all the way open, and that's a whole other thing. So, follow? Okay, so what's the bypass valve for?
When the filter clogs.
And the filter clogs. Relief valve is your pressure regulator. Oh, I have some good stuff there. Pressure pump, gear driven. Okay, it's sucks oil from the tank. If you're a physics person, you wouldn't like that word because we just create a low pressure and the actual air outside pushes it. I got that, but I say sucks oil from tank, oil from tank. So how's the oil get from down here to the up here? Oil pump sucks it up. So you got to have a good oil pump. And if you didn't put oil in there, that's why I said some people put grease on there to help get it. When the oil pumps go dry, they tend to not want to suck the oil up, so you can have problems. So that's why, especially aircraft that have been sitting around for a little bit, they tend to go dry, and you may have to actually pre-oil them. Did I tell you my mess I made in my plane? Really? I made a hell of a
I
mess.
think you did.
I did. After I changed out my engine analyzer and I had everything off for a month, and I started up and it wouldn't. I didn't get oil pressure, so I shut it down. Opened up the hose, start again, nothing. Shut it down. Figured it was. I didn't tell you the story.
I think you did, but it was
You did,
last class, last
I
semester.
don't remember.
I told us about the spray, or told someone else.
Okay, so the way my engine is, the oil filter goes on this way, and then right below it are the oil pump gears. And so I had to take the oil filter off because I had to do a bunch of work back in there. It was in the way. And so it was off for quite a while and moving the prop around. And normally that filter holds oil and kind of slowly drips in over time. It keeps the oil pump very wet for a very long period of time. But it was all off for a month or so. And so I changed out the oil hose, all the pressure sensors, everything is new. And so I go out and I start it up and look over and I'm like, I got no oil pressure. And this engine just usually gets oil pressure like that. So I'm like, well, I'll wait for the 20 seconds, 30 seconds. And so I did, and got nothing. So I shut it down. And so I think, well, maybe it's the new pressure sensor because now it's electronic instead of manual. So, check the wires on that, take off the hose, look at it's dry. So that's not it, I took the hose off from out the firewall that goes in, and I'm like, well, that's dry. Well, I'll put a little bag over it, maybe, don't know why. Start it up, wait, 20 seconds, shut down. Okay, the bag's dry, the hose is dry. Well, out of engines, the oil pressure that comes out of the engine, we use elbows that have a very tiny little hole drilled in it. And I was always told the theory behind that little tiny hole is one of two things. Either it's there to take out power pulsations, or if you should lose your oil hose, you would have a period of time where that little orifice would not dump all the oil out. You don't have time to fly. It'd be just a slow leak. So anyway, I thought, well, maybe that little thing got plugged because I had the hose off for a period of time. I don't know. So take the hose off, which is a total bitch, and safety wire up in there. I'm like, oh man, it's totally clear. Blow some air in there. Shop air. Always got to get my shop air in there. All right, that's not working. Start it up. Wait 20 seconds. Get out. Ah man, nothing even came out of that little hole. Thinking about it. Oh, maybe the pump is just dry. I've never had this problem. So I take off the oil filter and I get some syringes and suck up some oil and I squirt it in there. Screw the oil filter back on. Get in the airplane. Start it up. Of course, it's not telling me I have oil pressure because I have the hose off and everything. So I'll just go, good 15, 20 seconds and see if, if I got a little oil dripping out of it. Nope, I got all of the oil out of that. I mean, it just made a freaking mess. Went all over the tarmac, on the bottom of my wing, coated the tail. I mean, it was just horrible. So, yeah, it was just a dry pump.
You have a free paint waxing.
Yes, I did. It's very shiny on the left side there. It's like, what do you use to shine it? Phillips 20W50.
You immediately called the hazmat team to come in and clean it up for you.
Oh, you knew I did. No, I actually had to run down to the feed store, and I got a huge bag of cat litter, and I'm pouring it all over. It's a private airport, hoping the owner doesn't come out and say, what are you doing? Nothing. Okay. Leaks in the gasket will suck air. Pump wants to pump. I don't want to say it doesn't care if it's oil or air. It's going to pump what it gets. If it gets air, it's going to pump air. If it gets oil, it's going to pump oil. We want the oil, but it will pump air. So you can have a real problem if you have leaks in your gaskets, like that leak, that tube that that pickup tube, that's a big one. So remember that a pressure gauge just reads pressure. It doesn't care if it's reading oil pressure or air pressure. Whatever it is, it's the pressure you have. You don't want air pressure, so you just have to be careful with that. Pressure gauge read pressure. If you have an air leak, you're reading air pressure, not oil pressure. There's different types of pressure. Are you aware of that? The gauges? PSIG, pounds per square inch gauge. PSID. I think it's, yeah, differential. And PE PSI?
Pepsi, baby.
Pepsi. That's just Pepsi. All right. Normal oil pressure. Depends on your airplane. Idle. Idle's going to be pretty low. 15 to 20 PSI. I think my red line at idle is 5. Cruise. 60 to 115. Depends on the aircraft. I think mine tops out at about 60. I think mine is something like 35 to 60, I think, on mine. For obvious reasons, the pump is designed to pump more oil than the engine can handle. It would be really, really bad if you designed a pump that only pumped just as much as it needs. Because as soon as it starts to wear a little bit, you won't have any. So you have to have that oil pressure relief valve. So we need an oil pressure relief valve. You have a non-adjustable oil pressure relief valve on all of your engines. So the way we add more oil pressure is to take that cap off, which is a very oily mess because there's a lot of oil there, and you add washers behind the spring, which pushes the spring out more, which pushes on that ball more, which causes that ball to seat a little bit tighter, and it takes more oil pressure to open it. So the newer engines, like Cummins, they just have an adjustable screw, which is really nice. It doesn't make a big mess. You can adjust it real easily. Oil pressure relief. Let's see, excess oil is relieved by oil pressure relief valve and routed where?
To the inlet side.
Yep.
of the
It's bypassed.
Sorry.
Not bypassed, it's relieved. That's a much better word. Is relieved. Relieved and sent back to the inlet side of the pump. What is the inlet side of the pump specifically for your engine? The oil sump is the inlet side of the pump. All right. What happens if the relief sticks open?
Low or low.
Sticks open. If you get, it doesn't seat well, you get a piece of safety wire underneath the ball. Continentals use more of a plunger, more of a valve looking thing that has to go in and seat all the way around a little bit more. I like Lycoming systems better with that little ball. If relief sticks open, you lose oil pressure, or you'll have low oil pressure. Open. Yeah. You lose oil pressure. So that's bad. Adjust. When would you want to adjust your oil pressure? Hot or cold?
Hot.
Yep. All right. I guess that's all the time I have for tonight.